Welcome to this introduction on our course TR060, Biology and Biomedical Sciences. There's never been a more exciting time to be a biologist, and I'm going to take the next little while bringing you through some of the really exciting avenues that we can explore as part of our degree. My name's Andrew Jackson. I'm an associate professor. I'm a zoologist of sorts, and I am also the director of the course TR060. It's impossible to overlook the enormous sort of upset and frustration that the COVID pandemic has caused us. It's a problem born of biology, but it's one that's a really great success story for biologists, and it's been solved thanks to centuries of academic knowledge, particularly built upon over the last several decades. And what's really great about it is that biologists of all flavours have played their part in helping to understand and ultimately solve this pandemic problem. So we're going to take a little walk through some of the roles in which biologists have played and how our general science degree will play into your training in this sort of topic. The key to biology is understanding everything from the very, very small to the very, very large. And one of the things that's important is we understand the most basic building blocks of life, that is RNA and DNA, the biomolecules that form the inside of the cell and the proteins that sit on its outside. We understand how these things interact because it's this understanding at this very basic level that helps us to manage these new sorts of challenges of new arising diseases when they arise. Obviously, COVID is hugely complex, and within a host, there's all sorts of things at play, from how the virus invades the cells themselves and replicates, to its interactions with all the other cell types in our body, our immune system here in the middle, but ultimately then as well how the virus is interacting with the organs, such as the lungs and other blood vessel structures throughout our body that causes the disease ultimately. And it's our understanding as biologists that built up over decades that has allowed science as a whole to build upon our understanding of viruses, how to build vaccines, but how to build new vaccines such as the new mRNA ones, because of all the work that has gone before us. And it's our understanding of the immune system and that has also allowed us to invent new therapeutics to help manage the immune response that is causing ultimately some of the destructive pathologies in hosts who've been affected by it. So it really is a phenomenal success story. It's this huge investment and understanding of the very, very small aspects of intracellular and organ level infections that has allowed us to come up with these solutions. But it doesn't just stop there, because obviously things like viruses exist beyond the laboratory, and they exist in a real world with real people interacting with one another. And it's this sort of interaction of humans with society and our built environment and our resources like governments as well, that has led to our graduates being embedded in these sorts of decision-making areas in all corners of society and the world. Helping to make public health level decisions that are helping to control and limit the spread of this virus. And it's one of the great things about biology as well, that lets us work with all these other disciplines as well that go beyond just biology. And indeed, one of the core pieces of training you'll get in our course is in data analysis, mathematics and computational methods, and with additional optional modules in physics as well, that will set you up for a wide career pathway. For example, one of the huge success stories has been the development of mathematical models to predict and understand how the virus is transmitted. And it's sort of shown here by this sort of flow diagram here of people who are infected becoming infectious, and then isolating or not isolating, and then ultimately infecting susceptibles. And it's these sorts of mathematical models that allowed our COVID team here in Ireland and other teams around the world to take the observed data of infection rates and make predictions. Well, what happens if these are these sort of predicted outcomes here of, well, what would have happened if you had different types of intervention that slowed the spread of the virus to a greater or lesser extent. And you can see here that this is what allows you to build scenario models and make informed scientific decisions about how best to manage and control this type of challenge in society. And indeed, it goes beyond this again, because, you know, we spoke at the beginning about going from the small to the large, and of course we're up into large societies now, but it goes beyond that as well, because these sorts of diseases emerge ultimately from the environment. And it's this sort of complex interplay between humans and our land, and how we interact with biodiversity, and our efforts to conserve these things. These all play a part in controlling and the origin of emerging diseases that affect not just us, but they also affect wildlife, plants, and human health as well. So for one example, you know, in the left here, we know that there's a lot of these viruses arise from animal populations, such as bats and rodents. Sometimes they make additional transfers into other animals that we might interact with on a more domesticated sense. So some of them jump directly to humans, others come through intermediate hosts, and as they do, they mutate and evolve and change. And it's trying to understand these interactions in the wild, and how these diseases are spread, that will ultimately help us to understand and try to predict, well, when is the next one going to happen, and when is it going to come. There are other interesting elements to disease spread as well. We have situations of African painted dogs here who are being more and more exposed to rabies through domesticated, well, feral, originally domesticated, but now feral dogs through humans, but also then because the rabies affects them, it's causing population problems and conservation problems for these dogs, but also at the same time then it's increasing risk of rabies transmission to humans too. And of course it doesn't just stop there, because there are also enormous potential for diseases of plants as well. And of course this has huge impacts on agricultural production around the world, and sustainable, secure production of food for the global community. And ultimately what drives this all is evolution, and this is at the heart of all of biology, and it's a huge challenge as well. So understanding how viruses evolve and change is also key to understanding, well, how, you know, what is it we're doing that's driving this evolution, but also in terms of the interventions we make, but also then how do we have this sort of arms race of vaccine development against the different types of strains and variants as they arrive. And it's this evolution that drives the entire diversity of all of life. And this is what's core to our biology program. So it's evolution that really sits core to it all. We recognize and we take and teach to this idea of from small to large. So we can start here with the sort of unity of life, and by that I mean, what are the units of life, the basic building blocks, the biomolecules that ultimately give rise to life. So we start here with the unity of life, and from there we expose them to, these things get exposed to evolution and competition at the level of organisms. This gives rise to the diversity of life and the various emergence of different species and different sort of subspecies within, and ultimately then that feeds back on, through these different emergence of different variants, feeds back on the sort of the selection pressures and variation at the genetic and at the molecular level, and so on, in circles forever. And that's sort of basically how it all goes. So our teaching program sits within this. So we teach variously from molecules to cells, covering the biomolecules, the basic biochemistries of life, metabolism, photosynthesis and glycolysis in plants and animals, DNA, genetics and mutation. We move up then to think about, well, let's put those things together in the form of cells. So how do these things interact as cells, and ultimately how do they form cells and organs, tissues and organisms? So we're talking here about multicellular life, their physiology, their behavior and their neuroscience, and then ultimately also thinking about putting those organisms into the bigger worlds, because it's that bigger world that provides the selection pressures that decides which ones live and which ones die, and therefore which of the variants are the ones that are moving on into the next generation. And this means understanding things about how organisms interact, species interact with each other, their environment. So we're talking here about biodiversity, ecology, and entire populations of animals as well. So that's the sort of approach we take from small to large, and it's that ultimately then that gives rise to all of the diversity and variation in life, the phenomenal array of different animals and plants that exist in the world. But beyond that as well, also the phenomenal array of molecular diversity and ways in which these animals and plants solve things. And of course, if the biomolecular variation here is enormous from the various different, some of these animals and plants will have toxins and venoms, some of them will have very clever ways of dealing with very cold or extreme environments. And it's this sort of level of understanding of from biochemistry all the way up to what these animals and plants are doing in the real world, that's really key to our course and our program. So this is recognized in the structure. So this is what our structure of our course looks like. You come in here in first year, and in first and second year you will take a series of core credit modules in biology that you will all take together. And then you will also have some opportunities I'll go through in a moment to make some choices and sort of flavor your course as you like. So you can flavor your degree with the kinds of things you find most interesting or just explore something new. Those first 2 general years then transfer into more specialist years in years 3 and 4. So we have 11 exit routes out of this degree. They're listed here. They're very variable. There's a lot of overlap between many of them, but they also just basically let you explore that variation in biology as well, and sort of find what it is that interests you the most on your way out. Now this, I think, is one of the most important aspects of our course, is having this general entry. So you have this general entry here, and in doing so, it exposes you to the core skills in biology and science that are required to be a scientist at the end. But they also let you explore all these, there's all these extra sort of subfields and parts of science that you never would have been exposed to ever before. And so it lets you come in, it lets you explore what things you find interesting, what things you find less interesting, but it also will open your eyes, I'm quite sure, to whole new things you never would have thought of were even a subject matter and could be studied. And so while you will work your way towards the specialization at the end, ultimately, again, as you will see in a few moments, the world is your oyster with this degree. Just because you finish with one of these 11 degrees this is not the end of your training. This is only the beginning potentially of your training, and you can take the skills you've learned and take the subjects you've studied, and then move on in your career and perhaps even become a different type of biologist or scientist, or move into various other subject matters as well. For us biologists particularly, just because we exit with one of these routes here doesn't label us that forever. There's so much overlap in biology, and there's so much potential to move around, that any one of these outcomes here, any one of these output degrees here, could easily move and slide into one of the other subject matters in biology or beyond, through additional training or studying in the future. So looking a little bit more closely at the first year core modules. So these are the modules that you will all take. These are mandatory core modules. You'll take 20 credits total of core in semester 1 and another 20 credits of core in semester 2. So in semester 1 you'll take from molecules to cells, and then that'll be complemented in semester 2 by a module in organisms to ecosystems. So these are large biology modules that include a variety of lectures, tutorials and practical skills in the laboratory. In semester 1 you will take a dedicated chemistry for life sciences module, teaching the basics of chemistry that are required for all biologists to understand and know. And then in semester 2 you'll have a mandatory module in mathematics, statistics and computation, because these are absolutely core skills to have as a biologist. That then leaves some scope for you to choose additional modules. So that brings you up to 40 credits of core material at the top, and our year is comprised of 60, so you'll make up that other 20 credits by choosing 2 of these modules per semester. So here on this side, these are run in semester 1, and these ones over here will run in semester 2. And this lets you then start flavouring your degree with your sort of subjects that you maybe want to just try out, or subjects that you think might be useful to you in the future, or indeed subjects that you just really enjoy and would like to pursue in more depth. So we have, for example, modules in geoscience, modules in Spaceship Earth, an introduction to Earth System Science in semester 1, and that's complemented, if you wish, in semester 2 by an introduction to geology, a beginner's guide to planet Earth. We then have a foundation physics module for life and earth sciences, So this will provide you with the basics of physics, which is a really useful set of skills to have as a biologist. But also, if you're thinking of moving into secondary school teaching, this one is one we strongly recommend, because it helps to meet the requirements of a minimum of 10 credits in physics. That one's repeated in both semesters. So that one is a large popular module that's repeated in both semesters. You will choose it to do in only one. And then same happens with the Science, Education and Communications module. This is a great module if you're thinking about moving into, if you have interest in media or writing books or even considering television, then things like science, education, communication could be really interesting for you and really useful for you as a skill to have as well, because communicating your work is always an important part of any degree. And that too is offered in both semesters, giving you a chance to sort of pick and choose here which sort of which combination of these modules you'd like to take in your first year. That then moves us on into year 2. So year 2 follows follows programmatically from year 1. So we now have our core biology modules we have in semester 1 from molecules to cells, part 2. Okay, so that's the complementary one to first year sitting here. And then in semester 2, that'll be matched with 2 modules running concurrently. One is cells to organisms, and the other one takes us all the way from organisms up to ecosystems. These then here explore in more depth the subjects touched upon in your first year biology module. So this year we've got 3 dedicated biology modules. In semester 1, those are complemented with core mandatory modules, a 5-credit module in statistics and computation, and another 5-credit module in history, philosophy and ethics of science. And really that's there to recognize that we must always think, we must always deploy our degrees in very ethical ways, and it's really important that we give some time and consideration to where it is science has come from and what it is we're trying to do with it. Just like we had in first year, our second year also offers a series of optional modules, and here we have even more to choose from. So in semester 1, you'll choose 2 per semester. In semester 1, you've got modules on sustainable production, food, drinks and drugs. We have ones on molecular nutrition. We've got more geosciences ones from atoms to rocks, and we've got sedimentary processes and environments, and we have a biology one on influences of animal behavior. Then in semester 2, we have genes, genomes, disease and diversity. We have microbes, immune systems and their interaction. We then have a chemistry module for those who wish to pursue that in more depth. We've got chemistry for biologists. That might be complementary to something like biochemistry, immunology, genetics, etc. We also have a geography module called Dynamic Earth that you can take, and a maths module, Euclidean and non-Euclidean geometry, that's could be taken by those of you interested in maths, but again, this is also one that's particularly useful and helpful to those considering a career in secondary education going forward, because again, it helps to meet those specific requirements for those courses. And what I'll just note here is that so you're free to pick these modules as you like. It doesn't matter which ones you pick. It does not matter what you intend to study in years 3 and 4. You can choose any of these. Some of them might be more complementary to some of the year 3 and 4 modules, but these modules have been designed in second year and first year explicitly to just be of use or of interest to you if you want to explore those subjects in more detail. And this is what's great, because it really gives you a chance to come in first year, maybe you have an idea what you want to study, but it lets you really explore your interests widely and then carry those interests over into your specialist degrees in year 3 and 4. So in years 3 and 4, you will specialize in one of those 11 degree subjects. And this starts to become then a very different experience. You're now in much smaller classes and tutorials typically, and you're taught by researchers who are leaders in their field. So you're going to spend more time interacting with these principal investigators within these smaller classes, and these are people who, as indeed are all the teaching staff in Trinity in our course, these are people who are generating new knowledge. These are researchers and teachers together, so your professors and in the course, and these are people who are making new discoveries as well as teaching you the basics. And particularly in years 3 and 4, we start moving you on to teaching you those higher sort of cutting edge research knowledge and skills that are basically happening live right at that moment in time. And particularly in year 4, this is capped off with a research project that you will undertake. This is a fairly large research project. You'll spend several weeks working typically within the research laboratory or within the research group, depending on how they're set up, which is being run by one of these professors in the specialist degree that you're taking. And so you'll have a chance there to interact with their postgraduates and their postdoctoral researchers and get involved in research that they're undertaking currently. So what do I mean by research-led teaching? Well, that, really what that does mean is that these people are out there making these discoveries, and they could be doing that in the field or in the laboratory. And there's a whole array of interesting activities going on in Trinity. And I'll encourage and point you to some of the other sort of information on the various websites that run these degrees, but also many of them will have introductory videos as well that will give you an insight into the type of work that they do in those 11 exit degrees. This Capstone Research project, like I said, is a large project. It's 20 credits, so that's a third of your fourth year. A third of your fourth year is spent working on this independent research project, where you're supervised by one of these leading researchers. You're embedded within their program, and at the end of it, you will produce a written thesis, written project report, and in several of these instances, these can lead to actual scientific publication with your research team that you've been working with. So thinking beyond your degree then, what we are offering is an education for life. We're giving you a rigorous training in your field, in your chosen biology field, with a very broad base, and then further specialization with the freedom ultimately to go anywhere with your degree. As I said, whichever degree you come out with, you are not labeled that forever. And indeed, many people in biology and the other disciplines often welcome people from outside their discipline, because they can bring a new perspective on existing problems and challenges that maybe had never been thought about before. Our course offers outstanding employment and career prospects, particularly with a whole host of transferable skills built as part of the program and integrated throughout it, including data analysis, communication, creative and critical thinking, problem solving, and agile learning. And by that we mean the ability for you to have learned how to learn yourself, and how to pick up and learn new skills and new knowledge into the future throughout your career. Our graduates go to all corners of the world. Approximately a third of them will remain as a sort of professional scientist, either conducting research in academia or industry or other research organizations. Approximately a third will use their qualification to go on into related topics and fields, including teaching, medicine, journalism, law, agriculture, administration, etc. And a third again will go on to work outside in the area of sciences, relying on their transferable skills acquired in science, such as in the finance and computing sectors. So for now, I'd like to just give you a very brief story of one of our graduates. So we are proud of many of our graduates, and we could choose many to highlight, but one in particular is Dr. Bill Campbell. He graduated in zoology, which was zoology at the time in 1952, and at the time he was absolutely fascinated in parasitology. And throughout an absolutely phenomenal and stellar career, he went on in 2015 to share the Nobel Prize in Physiology or Medicine with Satoshi Omura for their discoveries concerning a novel therapy against infections from roundworm parasites. And he did this whilst working for the pharmaceutical company Merck. So what exactly did he do? Well, river blindness remains a threat, but this was sort of a typical feature in some parts of the world, particularly in sub-Saharan Africa and in parts of South America, where you would see children leading elder blind people around. And these people were blinded because of an infection with a roundworm parasite, which causes river blindness. It damages the eye. And what Bill Campbell did was he recognized they were working studying with Omura this bacteria here, the Streptomyces avermytilis. This is a soil-based bacterium, and they were studying its effects on domesticated animals and how it interacted with and its presence affected the infection rates with roundworms. So not river blindness, but a related species. And what they eventually did was they discovered and isolated a chemical that this bacteria was producing that actually helps to kill or control or weaken the roundworm parasites in the soil, which is ultimately where humans were picking them up from. And once they isolated that and they made some modifications to the chemical, they named it ivermectin. So this was the treatment here, and it turned out to just be phenomenally effective against roundworms. And later on, they then realized there was potential to apply it to humans. And so after a series of human trials, he took it beyond the laboratory, and in 1987 he had managed to convince Merck, the company, to donate a version of ivermectin designed to treat river blindness, effectively for, well, almost for free. But they released the patent on it, so they weren't patenting it for human use. So companies were able to make it throughout the world very, very cheaply and deliver it. And over 30 years later, after the program was launched, there's been nearly 3 billion cumulative treatments delivered to people across more than 146,000 communities, and have effectively broken the cycle of river blindness and effectively made it disease-free in at least 4 of the 6 countries affected in South America, and in regions in 5 African countries as well. So this has been one of the biggest public health interventions, successful public health interventions ever, and all on the basis of understanding some basic biochemistry, some microbiology, and then to how to deploy that in a real world setting, considering the ecology and the interactions that humans have with wildlife as well. So it really is a phenomenal success story that spans everything from the very small in biology to the very, 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 very large. And Bill Campbell came into college as a young man from Donegal. He got excited by a subject, parasitology, he had never experienced before, but he did so because of the general science program at the time. And we're happy to say that at the end he graduated, much like our graduates do, as very happy graduates at the other side. So this is one of those 11 classes looking happy on their graduation day. And who knows what any one of these, or you indeed as well, could go on and be the next Bill Campbell and make the next great discovery and impact the world. So with that, I'll say thank you, and we look forward very much to welcoming hopefully many of you to our course next year. And there's lots more information available here and on the associated Open Day events and web pages, including lots of information on those other 11 degrees in more detail. So thank you very much.